Street. I beg your pardon? I didn't say the introduction, which I'm now going to say. Evelina, a country innocent with a complicated history, is visiting London for the first time. In a series of letters to her guardian, the Reverend Mr. Villars, she catalogues a series of misadventures which lead her to conclude, I cannot but lament to find myself in a world so deceitful, where we must suspect what we see, distrust what we hear, and doubt even what we feel. Queen Anne Street, April the 5th, Tuesday morning. I have a vast deal to say, and shall give all this morning to my pen. The diversions here are so very late that if I begin my letters after them, I could not go to bed at all. We passed a most extraordinary evening. A private ball, this was called, so I expected to have seen about 4 or 5 couple. But Lord, my dear sir, I believe I saw half the world. 2 very large rooms were full of company. In one were cards for the elderly ladies, and in the other were the dancers. The gentlemen, as they passed and repassed, looked as if they thought we were quite at their disposal, and only waiting for the honour of their commands. And they sauntered about in a careless, indolent manner, as if with a view to keep us in suspense. Long after, a young man who had for some time looked at us with a sort of negligent impertinence advanced on tiptoe towards me. He had a set smile on his face, and his dress was so foppish that I really believe he even wished to be stared at. And yet he was very ugly, bowing almost to the ground with a sort of swing, and waving his hand with the greatest conceit. After a short and silly pause, he said, "Madam, may I presume?" and stopped, offering to take my hand. I drew it back, but could scarcely forbear laughing. "Allow me, madam," he continued affectedly, "the honour and happiness, if I am not so unhappy as to address you too late, to have the happiness and honour—" Again he would have taken my hand, but bowing my head to conceal my laughter, I begged to be excused. He then desired to know if I had already engaged myself to some more fortunate man. I said no, and that I believed I should not dance at all. He would keep himself, he told me, disengaged in hopes I should relent, and then uttering some ridiculous speeches of sorrow and disappointment, though his face still wore that same invariable smile, he retreated.
When you see him kneel and swear, then of danger pray beware. Let him languish, sigh and grieve, things but practised to deceive. If his arts evade the church, leave the monster in the lurch. Naught but scorns and frowns bestow. Let him go. Let him go. Naught but scorns and frowns bestow. Let him go. Let him go.
Very soon after, another gentleman, gaily but not foppishly dressed, and indeed extremely handsome, with an air of mixed politeness and gallantry, desired to know if I was engaged, or would honour him with my hand for the dance. Well, I bowed, and I'm sure I coloured, for indeed I was frightened at the thoughts of dancing before so many people, all strangers, and which was worse, with a stranger. However, that was unavoidable, for though I looked round the room several times, I could not see one person that I knew. And so he took my hand and led me to the dance floor. I was seized with such a panic that I could hardly speak a word. He appeared to be surprised at my terror, which I believe was but too apparent. I did not choose to tell him that it was owing to my never before dancing but with a schoolgirl. Maria Mervan was standing next couple to us. How was I startled when she whispered to me that my partner was a nobleman, Lord Orville, that he should be so much my superior every way, quite disconcerted me, and you will suppose my spirits were not much raised when I heard a lady in passing say, "This is the most difficult dance I ever saw." "Oh dear then," cried Maria to her partner, "with your leave I'll sit down till the next." "So will I too then," cried I, "for I'm sure I can hardly stand." "But you must speak to your partner first," said she, for he had turned aside to talk with some gentlemen. However, I had not sufficient courage to address him, and so away we both tripped and seated ourselves at another end of the room. I was in the utmost confusion when I observed Lord Orville was everywhere seeking me with apparent perplexity and surprise. Approaching me, he begged to know if I was not well. I made no answer, but hung my head like a fool and looked on my fan. He then, with an air the most respectfully serious, asked if he had been so unhappy as to offend me. "Oh, no, indeed," cried I. He hoped, he said, that I would again honour him with my hand, as a new dance was just begun. I had not the presence of mind to say a single word, and so I let him once more lead me to the dance floor. When the dance was over, he led me to a seat, saying that he would not suffer me to fatigue myself from politeness. We were sitting in this manner when that fop, who had first asked me to dance, with the most ridiculous solemnity approached, and humbly begging Lord Orville's pardon for breaking in upon our conversation, asked me, "May I know to what accident I must attribute not having the honour of your hand?" Accident, sir? I repeated, much astonished. Yes, accident, madam, for surely it ought to be no common one that should tempt so young a lady to be guilty of ill manners. A confused idea now entered my head for the first time of something I had heard of the rules of assemblies. I had not once considered the impropriety of refusing one partner and afterwards accepting another. Ann Street, Thursday morning, April the 14th. Captain and Mrs. Mervan proposed a party to the pleasure gardens, including Madame Duval, whom everyone considered vulgar, Mrs. Mervan's friend Sir Clement Willoughby, Maria and myself. Well, my dear sir, we went to Ranelagh. It is a charming place, and the brilliance of the lights on my first entrance made me almost think I was in some enchanted castle or fairy palace, for all looked like magic to me. Everyone seemed out of humour, and though we joined parties, poor Madame Duval was avoided as much as possible by all but me, and I did not dare quit her for an instant. Indeed, I believe she was resolved I should not, for she leant upon my arm almost all the evening. We stopped to hear the singer.
Where can my day one checkered way, lass and lasses play, to the cowslip meadows run. The Lord sings away in the cornfield, sweet carols a thrush in the hawthorn bush, but Philida cries melody, Philida cries melody, where can my Damon be? Swift wind blows over mountains clear, each hill and dale with many, many glee resoundeth the strains of the distant plains, while around sings a busy, busy bee. Yet Philida cries melody, Philida cries melody, where can my Damon be? Like Damon waits in the grove, a garland rich he hath wove. Now with lightsome bound he treads on the ground to adorn his own true love, to adorn his own true love, to adorn his own true love. The Lord sings away in the cornfield, sweet carols a thrush in the hawthorn bush, and Philida cries merrily, Philida cries merrily, my Damon comes to me.
The room was so very much crowded that but for the uncommon assiduity of Sir Clement Willoughby, we should not have been able to procure a box, which is the name given to the arched recesses which are appropriate for tea parties, till half the company had retired. As we were taking possession of our places, some ladies of Mrs. Mervan's acquaintance stopped to speak to her and persuaded her to take a round with them. When she returned to us, what was my surprise to see that Lord Orville had joined her party. The ladies walked on. Mrs. Mervan seated herself and made a slight, though respectful, invitation to Lord Orville to drink his tea with us, which to my no small consternation he accepted. I felt a confusion unspeakable at again seeing him, nor did my situation lessen it, for I was seated between Madame Duval and Sir Clement, who seemed as little as myself to desire Lord Orville's presence. Indeed, the continual wrangling and ill-breeding of Captain Mervan and Madame Duval made me blush that I belonged to them. And poor Mrs. Mervan and her amiable daughter had still less reason to be satisfied. The first speech was made by Madame Duval, who said, "It's quite a shocking thing to see ladies come to so genteel as Ranelagh, with hats on. It has a monstrous vulgar look. I can't think what they wear them for. There's no such thing to be seen in Paris." "Indeed," cried Sir Clement, "I must own myself no advocate for hats. I am sorry the ladies ever invented or adopted so tantalising a fashion, for where there is beauty they only serve to shade it, and where there is none, to excite a most unavailing curiosity. I fancy they were originally worn by some young and whimsical coquette." "More likely," answered the captain, "they were invented by some wrinkled old hag, who'd a mind to keep the young fellows in chase, let them be never so weary." "I don't know what you might do in England," cried Madame Duval, "but I know in Paris no woman need to be at such trouble as that to be taken very genteel notice of." "Why, will you pretend for to say," returned the captain, that they distinguish the old from the young there as well as here. They don't make no distinguishments at all, said she. They're vastly too polite. More fools they, said the captain sneeringly. Would to heaven, cried Sir Clement, that for our own sakes we Englishmen too were blessed with so accommodating a blindness. Saturday morning, May the 16th. Here I am, my dear sir, staying with my cousins, the Brangtons, and I have a volume to write of the adventures of yesterday evening when we visited the Italian opera. Madame Duval, the Brangtons and myself were all crowded into the same carriage, but when we arrived at the opera house, I contrived to pay the coachman. They made a great many speeches, but Mr. Brangton had determined me not to be indebted to him. If I had not been too much chagrined to laugh, I should have been extremely diverted at their ignorance of whatever belongs to an opera. In a short time, we arrived at one of the doorkeeper's bars. Mr. Brangton demanded for what part of the house they took money. They answered, the pit, and regarded us all with great earnestness. Mr. Brangton put down a guinea. 2 tickets of admission were given to him. Mr. Brangton, in his turn, now stared at the doorkeeper and demanded what he meant by giving him only 2 tickets for a guinea. Only 2, sir, said the man. Why, don't you know that tickets are half a guinea each? Half a guinea each? Repeated Mr. Brangton. Why, I never heard of such a thing in my life. And pray, sir, how many will they admit? Just as usual, sir. 1 person each. But 1 person for half a guinea? Why, I only want to sit in the pit, friend. Had not the ladies better sit in the gallery, sir? For they'll hardly choose to go into the pit with their hats on. We were then conducted to another gallery, where, after some disputing, Mr. Branton at last paid, and we all went upstairs. But when we entered the gallery, their amazement and disappointment became general. For a few instants, they looked at one another without speaking, and then they all broke silence at once. "Lord, Papa!" exclaimed Miss Polly, "why, you have brought us to the 1 shilling gallery." "Ma foi!" cried Madame Duval. "I never sat in such a mean place in all my life. Why, says I, we shan't see nothing." In this manner they continued to express their dissatisfaction till the curtain drew up. Yet would they have suffered me to listen, I should have forgotten everything unpleasant and felt nothing but delight in hearing the sweet voice of the first singer. But they tormented me with continual talking. Said Miss Polly, "I think it's very pretty, only I don't know what it means." At the end of the first act, as the green curtain dropped, they imagined that the opera was done, and Mr. Branton expressed great indignation that he had been tricked out of his money with so little trouble. However, so determined he was to be dissatisfied that before the conclusion of the third act, he found still more fault with the opera for being too long and wondered whether they thought their singing good enough to serve us for supper. "It's my belief," said young Mr. Branton, that fellow's going to sing another song. Why, there's nothing but singing. I wonder when they'll speak."
Oh,
young Mr. Branton. What makes that fellow look so doleful when he's singing? Oh, probably because the character he performs is in distress and he's falling out of a window. Why, then, I think he might as well let alone singing till he's in better cue. It's out of all nature for a man to be piping when he's in distress. For my part, I never sing but when I'm merry, yet I love a song as well as most people. When the curtain dropped, they all rejoiced. On June the 17th. Yesterday, Mr. Smith carried his point of making a party for Vauxhall, consisting of Madame Duval, Monsieur Dubois, all the Brantons, himself, and me. For I find all endeavours vain to escape anything which these people desire I should not. There was a dispute as to the way in which we should go. Some were for a boat, others for a coach, and Mr. Branton himself was for walking. But the boat at length was decided upon. Indeed, this was the only part of the expedition that was agreeable to me, for the Thames was delightfully pleasant.
Hear of the jolly young Waterman who had planned fires which used for to ply, and he furthered his oars with such skill and dexterity, winning each heart and delighting each eye. He looked so neat and rowed so sturdily, the maidens all flocked to his boat so readily, and he eyed the young rogues with so charming an air, he eyed the young rogues with so charming an air, that this Waterman there was in want of a fair. What files of fine folks he host rode in his way, 'twas cleaned up so nice and so painted withal. He always was first oars when the fine city ladies in a party to Ranelagh went to Vauxhall, and oft times would they be giggling and leering, but was all one to Tom their jibing and jeering. For loving or liking he little did care, for loving or liking he little did care, for this Waterman there was in want of a fair. And yet but to see how strangely things happen, as he rode along thinking of nothing at all. He was plied by a damsel so lovely and charming, that she smiled, and so straightway in love did he fall. And would this young damsel soon banish his sorrow, he'd wed her tonight before even tomorrow. And how should this Waterman ever know care? And how should this Waterman ever know care, when he's married and never in want of a fair?
Vauxhall is very pretty, but too formal. I should have been pleased much better had it consisted less of straight walks. The trees, the numerous lights, and the company in the circle around the orchestra made a most brilliant and gay appearance. And had I been with a party less disagreeable to me, I should have thought it a place formed for animation and pleasure. There was a concert, in the course of which a concerto was so charmingly played that I could have thought myself upon enchanted ground. Had I spirits more gentle to associate with, a concerto in the open air is heavenly. About the orchestra, I heard a bell ring, and in a moment Mr. Smith, flying up to me, caught my hand, and with a motion too quick to be resisted, ran away with me many yards before I had breath to ask his meaning, though I struggled as well as I could to get from him. At last, however, I insisted upon stopping. "Stopping, ma'am?" cried he. "Why, we must run on, or we shall miss the cascade." And then again he hurried me away, mixing with a crowd of people, all running with so much velocity that I could not imagine what had raised such an alarm. We were soon followed by the rest of the party, and my surprise and ignorance proved a source of diversion to them all that was not exhausted the whole evening. Young Branton, in particular, laughed till he could hardly stand. The scene of the cascade I thought extremely pretty, and the general effect striking and lively. The Branton sisters agreed that we should now have a little pleasure, and they tittered and talked so loud that they attracted universal notice. "Lord Polly," said the eldest, "suppose we were to take a turn in the dark walk?" I remonstrated very warmly against this plan, but in the end, quite by compulsion, I followed them down a long alley in which there was hardly any light. time we came near the end, a large party of gentlemen, apparently very riotous, and who were hallooing, leaning on one another and laughing immoderately, seemed to rush suddenly from behind some trees, and meeting us face to face, put their arms at their sides and formed a kind of circle that stopped our retreating, for we were presently entirely surrounded. The Miss Branghtons screamed aloud, and I was frightened exceedingly. Our screams were answered with bursts of laughter, and for some minutes we were kept prisoners, till at last one of them, rudely seizing hold of me, said I was a pretty little creature. Terrified to death, I struggled with such vehemence to disengage myself from him that I succeeded, in spite of his efforts to detain me, and immediately, and with a swiftness which fear only could have given me, I flew rather than ran up the walk towards that part of the garden whence I perceived the lights and the company and the music. July the 1st, 5 o'clock in the morn. Oh, sir, what an adventure have I to write. All night it has occupied my thoughts, and I am now risen thus early to write it to you. Yesterday it was settled that we should spend the evening in Marybone Gardens, where Mr. Torrey, a celebrated foreigner, was to exhibit some fireworks. The party consisted of Madame Duval, all the Branghtons, Mr. Smith and Mr. Brown. We were almost the first persons who entered the gardens. Mr. Branton having declared that he would have all he could get for his money, which at best was only fooled away at such silly and idle places. This garden, as it is called, is neither striking for magnificence nor for beauty, and we were all so dull and languid that I was extremely glad when we were summoned to the orchestra upon the opening of a concerto, a concert in fact, a recital by Mrs. Salomon, who to me seems a singer of such exquisite fancy, feeling and variety. When notice was given us that the fireworks were preparing, we hurried along to secure good places for the sight. But very soon we were so encircled and incommoded by the crowd that Mr. Smith proposed the ladies should make interest for a form to stand upon. This was soon effected, and the men then left us to accommodate themselves better, saying they would return the moment the exhibition was over. The firework was really beautiful and told with wonderful ingenuity the story of Orpheus and Eurydice. At the moment of the fatal look which separated them forever, there was such an explosion of fire and so horrible a noise that we all, as of one accord, jumped hastily from the form and ran away some paces, fearing that we were in danger of mischief from the innumerable sparks of fire which glittered in the air. For a moment or two, I neither knew nor considered whither I had run. But then, to my great terror, perceived the cord had outrun all my companions, and saw not one human being I knew. With all the speed in my power, and forgetful of my first fright, I hastened back to the place I had left, but found the form occupied by a new set of people. I ran hastily up to two ladies, and cried, "For heaven's sake, dear ladies, afford me some protection." Then, in a drawling, ironical sort of voice, they asked, "What had frightened my little ladyship?" I told them my adventures very simply, and entreated they would have the goodness to assist me in finding my friends. I quickly observed that every other word I spoke produced a loud laugh. Had I been at liberty, I should have instantly run away from them. But as they held me fast, that was utterly impossible, and such was my dread of their resentment or abuse that I did not dare make any open attempt to escape them. Many halloos of who I was, what I was, and whence I came. My answers were very incoherent. But a few moments afterwards, I perceived, advancing our way, Lord Orville. We all stopped. I then looked up. He bowed. Good God, with what expressive eyes did he regard me! Never were my surprise and concern so strongly marked. Methought, my dear guardian, the pleasure, the surprise of that moment recompensed me for all the chagrin I had before felt. Hand with hand and heart with heart, love must fetter, ne'er to part. And if nuptial bliss you